Hello, and happy Feast of the Annunciation to all of you. Thank you for joining in today in our continued study of Ecclesiastes here at the pastor's desk. I'm Pastor Patterson at Faith Lutheran Church, and today we are going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And it starts off with one of the most well-known passages of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon says there's a time for everything. A time to be born, a time to die, so on and so forth. Then he goes on to talk about how God is the one who's really in control here. He says that he's given this work, he's made everything. He's the one who's in control. He's that substance that you can grab onto that this other vanity doesn't show. And then we end chapter 3 with kind of a downer, if you will. But basically, Solomon goes back to talking about death and how we cannot escape it. Everything is ordered, and there's nothing that we can do. Everything we try is vanity. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive right into chapter 3. We'll start with verse 1. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill, and a time to heal, a time to break down, and a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away, a time to tear, and a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, and a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. So this, again, iconic. When people hear Ecclesiastes, this is one of the things that they think of, that there's a time for everything. And you may have heard in there, in verse 5 at the end there, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. If that doesn't speak to our modern situation, I don't know what does. This is divine-given social distancing, if you will. But here, Solomon says there's a time for everything. And that doesn't mean that these things are bad. There's a time to be born, that's good. There's a time to die. And that's just what happens. That's what comes in this life. And he goes on, there's a time for everything. And basically the point he's making is that because there's a time for everything, you can't change that. He makes this point later that God is the one who controls it all. It's not you. You aren't the one who determines when you're born or determines when you die. You don't determine when it's harvest season and when it's time to plant. God has ordained these things, and we simply live it. We live out what God has put before us. And so, to try and control these things is vanity. It's trying to chase the wind. You can't do it, but there is one who can. So we continue. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart. Yet so he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. That is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken away from it. God has done it, so that people fear before him. That which is already has been. That which is to be already has been. And God seeks what has been driven away. So here, Solomon is very clear. You are not in control. God is in control. And he said, what gain does a worker get from his toil? He's talked about before how toil is vanity, that you work and what do you get to keep in death? Nothing. But God is the one who's in control. It says he's put eternity into man's hearts. He has given them eternity, yet so that they cannot grasp it. We in our fallen nature cannot understand God, which is why everything seems like vanity, that we can't understand what's going on. We can't understand why a pandemic is happening, all of these things. And, we are left to wonder, but at that same time, we are left to trust. We're left to trust in God that he is the one who is in control. And he's the one who orders our days. He's the one who causes us to be born. All of these. God is the one who does the work, not us. And so Solomon says that I perceive that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and do good as long as they live. This is the Christian life. We trust in God, and then as far as this life goes, we serve our neighbor, we do what is good, we rejoice in everything that happens, both good and bad, because the good is a great blessing from God, and the bad is a blessing as well. We grow from those hardships. Oftentimes God uses those hardships as tests for us, to test our faith and to even strengthen that faith. But even death can be a blessing. Death is an enemy for sure. It's the last enemy to be conquered when Jesus returns. But death also is a blessing for the believer, because death brings us to eternity, to paradise. Paul says to live is Christ and to die is gain. And that's very much true. And so in this time of pandemic, it's always good to remember that if we would get sick with this illness, our response should not be anger towards God, but a blessing, and say, God, praise be to you for giving me this illness, for I will either recover from it and be greater for it, stronger for it, and be able to minister to others, or you'll take me to paradise. It's a win-win for the Christian, which is why we always hope in God and not in these other things that are vanity, that are gusts of wind that we can't hold on to. And so this is what Solomon is saying. So we continue. Verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beasts, for all is vanity. All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? So here, Solomon has said that God is in control, that he has done these things. He's put them into motion. No one can add or subtract to it, no matter how hard we try, no matter how much we think. Even if we've discovered medical cures to things, thinking, look what we've done, we've advanced this. It's all ordained by God. God is in control of this. He's put everything into motion. And so don't think that you have done this. God is the one who has done it all. Everything you do is vanity. It doesn't last. And so he says it goes back to death, because death is the great equalizer for Solomon here. He says that he looks at justice, but even justice has wickedness in it. I mean, look at the justice system in any country. There are times when the guilty are let free and the innocent is put in prison. And this is just the nature of this sinful world. That even in justice there is wickedness. Even in righteousness there is wickedness. And so don't look to those things for assurance, because those are broken too. And he says, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and every work. And we know that God judges at the last day. On that day, Jesus will return and judge everyone, the good and the bad, the righteous and the evildoer, the sheep and the goats. He will be the great judge, and his judgments will be pure. There will be no wickedness in his justice, in his judgments. And so we look forward to that day. But here, right now, our justice is broken. And so Solomon continues. He talks about how what happens to the children of man, people, is the same that happens to beasts. And he says that the children of man should see themselves, that this is in fact God testing them to show that we are but beasts. There's nothing really unique about us, and as far as an ability to save ourselves. Just as an animal cannot save themselves from death, we cannot save ourselves from death. Only God has the power to do that. And so Solomon says we all die. We all go to the same place. We all meet the same end. And so what is there then after that? With knowing that there's nothing we can do to save ourselves, and there's nothing that we can do to extend our lives, just like the beasts can't, what is there to do? And Solomon goes back to that idea that we should rejoice in our work, for that is our lot. Rejoice in what God has given us, and be glad with what we have. Enjoy the little things, because they're all gifts from God, and God is the one who gives them. And that's really what we need to keep reminding ourselves, that God gives everything. And he gives it to us because of his Son, because Jesus has loved us so much that Jesus went and died on the cross, and that death on the cross covers us. It takes away our sin. It brings us into the family of God, and now God gives us all of these first article gifts and all of these things. And so it's through Jesus and his sacrifice that meaning is given to things, that we can rejoice in our work. Without God, back that we talked about in the last video, without God, our work, our toil is vanity. It's meaningless. But with Christ at the center, our work does have meaning, not to save us, but to help our neighbor and to show the love of Christ. And so this is what we should rejoice in. We should rejoice in our work because of what Christ has done. For we don't know what will happen after us. We barely know what happened before us. Even though history repeats itself over and over, we don't know what happened in the early days of this world, when God created things other than what Scripture has told us. And we don't know what comes afterwards. And so we live this life. We rejoice in what God has given us, and trust that he will make all things right, that he's in control, and he keeps his promises of always being with us and always protecting his people. And so this is where Solomon leaves off in chapter 3. And so next time we'll continue with chapter 4. It's a little bit of a shorter chapter, but we'll see what Solomon has in store for us. Stay safe out there. God bless.